Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate your time. I'm Katie Earle with Erie County Senior Services, and I'm here with Anna VanDien from the Wilson Support Center and Hospice Bereavement Services, which we'll hear about her. But before, a couple housekeeping things. We are recording this class, and if all goes as planned, I'll be able to post it on our website at some point next week. If you have any questions throughout Anna's presentation, please put it right in the chat as soon as you think about it, and we'll get to as many questions at the end as we can. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce her to you. Look at that rhyming. Okay. Anna is the coordinator of the Wilson Support Center. The Wilson Support Center provides grief support and education that is sensitive, compassionate, and responsive to the needs of the Western New York community. Information and resources are available to any individual experiencing grief and loss, and services are provided by licensed healthcare professionals and peer volunteers. As an affiliate of Hospice Buffalo, the Wilson Support Center also delivers bereavement services to bereaved loved ones of hospice patients. And I'm sure she can speak more about that. In the role of coordinator, Anna is responsible for triaging and personalizing grief support, supporting staff development, and fostering community relationships through education and training. She has former experience as a hospice social worker and dementia care advocate, and she's lovely and she's here. Thank you, Anna. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate everything you do to help organize these things for our community and to have an outlet like this to connect with all of you. As Katie said, I'm Anna, and it's really nice to share some time with you today. I hope your day has been going okay so far. This is a presentation about coping with grief and loss. I offer a lot of information in general about grief and the aspects of loss that can sometimes be overlooked. And part of this conversation can also kind of pick at the wounds that we all have from our lived experiences. So at the top, I always like to put a bit of a disclaimer out there that these are real life concepts that we all connect to in one way or another. And probably for those that are attending, probably more so. So please take good care of yourself throughout the presentation. Stepping away if you need to step away, take a break. I'll be sharing my contact information at the end. And if you ever need to touch back and touch base with me again in the future, there's a way to do that. So also take care of yourself later today, because sometimes these things can ripple through us and pop back up over time. What we're going to talk about today is specific to the Wilson Support Center and covering some of the services. But I'm going to expand a little bit further just about what grief is, what it's not, a lot of the misconceptions that exist about grief, and then also what coping looks like, what it means to help other people in their grief, give you some practical tools and suggestions to walk away from today, as well as some reputable resources, so that if you're wanting to read more, learn more, you can do that exploring on your own. We are also a resource, as you'll soon learn, of a lot of information, and we can do some of that researching on your behalf. In fact, we've probably done a lot of it already, as our work really is focused on tailoring and personalizing resources for whatever your specific circumstance is. So right at the top, I just want you to have a sense of where we're located and how to get in touch with us. This is our Wilson Support Center building. It is located on the Hospice and Palliative Care Buffalo campus. So that's on Como Park Boulevard. Our entrance is kind of on the other side. What would that be? The southern end of our campus on Bennett Road. So if you're familiar with the Apple Tree Business Mall in Cheektowaga, we are just behind that. The services that we provide as part of the Wilson Support Center are available to the community in Western New York, regardless of eligibility around hospice or palliative care. That no connection is necessary in order to receive these community grief support services. So that may be the biggest takeaway today, is that you have access to the support, even if you don't know what to do with your own grief or in supporting someone else's. you can access us. We're all licensed providers who have expertise specifically in grief and loss and can help you navigate through a conversation of what some next steps might look like. So we offer a lot of support group referrals and counseling referrals. These are all vetted by us to make sure that the resources we're sharing and the information that is given out is as up to date as possible, and that we're working to link you with something that really speaks accurately about the grief experience. We don't want to send you somewhere that might have a negative kind of a negative perception of grief, or judge you for your grief, or dismiss your grief in any way. So we speak with every provider that is on our referral list, every agency, every group facilitator, to make sure that we have a sense of what they can offer and how well it matches what our community grief needs are. I like to mention that we specifically highlight providers of counseling and the health insurance that they participate with, because we know that that can be a major barrier for folks accessing counseling services. So that's something we can help work with. We also can offer some additional assistance in actually navigating that system. We know that people who are grieving are struggling even just to take care of themselves, let alone navigate these complex systems we live within. Our team also develops a lot of printed literature or digital resources. We also identify resources that are really reputable online, and we have our own resource library with all of that. So we have some aspects of our library that are really devoted to just general information about grief and loss for someone who's maybe just orienting to this experience for the first time. And then we have things that are more specific so that folks can really feel that they're reading something that acknowledges and understands the circumstance they find themselves in. We do a lot of resource linkage as well, because we know that grief is happening, not in a vacuum, but in real life. And there's a lot of aspects. I mean, grief really covers every aspect of your life. And so there are needs that sometimes are outside of our scope, and we want to make sure that we just connect folks to the agency, the group, the organization that's going to best meet that need that might be grief related, but it's not the focus. And finally, I offer a lot of informational presentations about grief and loss, working towards our goal of having a more grief aware community in general in Western New York. So I've spoken to other healthcare partner organizations. I've spoken to a number of higher ed institutions, a lot of the counseling services and agencies around the Buffalo region specifically. We've partnered with and just offered some additional information and training. So if that's ever something that might be helpful to your volunteer group or to your community connections, please reach out, and I'd be happy to discuss how we can best support that learning process. Within that umbrella of the Wilson Support Center exists the Hospice Bereavement Program. So this is a standard inclusion of the hospice benefit. When a hospice patient dies, their coverage includes 13 months of grief counseling and support groups for the folks within their support circle. So there's no cost to these services. There's no need to show insurance information. It's something that is included within that hospice benefit. So it's pretty phenomenal to find that kind of support present after a death. And we currently have individual counseling and support groups available remotely. We also offer a correspondence program that sends different information about grief and loss throughout those 13 months following the death. They're nice touch points to remind folks that we're here if they need us. But also folks will call us and let us know that they found the information to really speak to them. It can talk about something as general as, grief responses to keep an eye on in children and teens, into more complex emotions and how to navigate those, like guilt and anger, offering some suggestions offering some ideas around memorializing a loved one. And we'll talk a little bit about those topics even today, just to scratch the surface. But that's another really beneficial aspect of our program, that even if folks decline groups, decline counseling, they're still able to receive that information. And a lot of that information is part of the printed literature that we provide to the community at large. There are also remembrance events included within the hospice bereavement program. Those tend to be very large events. They're very highly attended. And so we have struggled to resume those since COVID. And right now we're just hoping to kind of reframe them into the more contemporary times that we live in and reconsider what that looks like to resume. So let's get into the topic now that you have a sense of where I'm coming from. The idea of grief actually begins with the idea of attachment. Because when we lose something or someone, or we are disconnected from a place that matters a lot to us, that loss is what causes this response to grief. And so what first happens is that attachment, that bond. And this image is really helpful to illustrate that in here we're seeing the actual physical connection, but there's an emotional, a spiritual connection between a parent and a child, and a child and their doll. And you can imagine that if these connections, these bonds were threatened or lost altogether, there would be some sort of response, right? That would seem normal, that would seem reasonable. So I often think of that child losing their doll, and maybe it's just misplaced, or maybe it's been, maybe an arm fell off. Maybe it's misplaced and we can't find it again. Um, Maybe it fell out of the car and we can't find it again. So it's lost. There's this grief that comes from that loss, a favorite toy. And we might imagine that tantrum maybe follows, or just a wellspring of tears. There's a lot of responses that might come from that, right? And that's grief. And that's what we expect. Of course, it's going to be different for each person, but it's something, but we expect there to be some sort of acknowledgement, some sort of change, because this change is so significant. So when we talk about losses, I'm trying to give some examples not only of some death related losses, but also of some non-death related losses. So a lot of the loss that I talk about in my position tends to be death related because we're connected to the hospice bereavement program. But there's a lot of non-death related losses that even happen in the anticipation of a death related loss, and certainly in a lot of life transitions. So let's talk about each of them a little bit more. Death related losses are certainly a loved one or a pet. Those might be thought of right off the bat. I think that's what a lot of people think of when they think of grief and loss, is the death of a person that is significant in your life. But certainly pets are part of those significant ties that we have in our lives. Our coworkers or our co-volunteers, those are relationships that we count on, that we have maybe daily or multiple times a week. Even the death of an acquaintance or a public persona can cause us to kind of step back and be surprised or shocked or touched in some way, because of the connection, because of an interaction, because of our sense of them as people. The non-death related losses can be changes in a relationship. It may be the end of a friendship or of a relationship, an estrangement. It could also just be the idea that maybe this person has moved away and now the way that we relate to one another is different, and that's really hard. We also see a lot of change, and with any change in life come those losses. So even something positive that we might think of, like graduation or getting married or retiring, those all have grief inherent in them as well. There is something lost where there's something gained. So all of those life transitions can also be accompanied by some difficult feelings. especially if everyone around you is feeling excited, but there is this other sense of a feeling that you're having as well. It may be that feeling of loss. People also experience a lot of loss of themselves, of an aspect of themselves through as they change through life. Health conditions, disabilities, changing fertility, financial status, even if it's just with retirement and having to adjust to a fixed income. The idea of the safety and security that comes from knowing yourself and having expectations and being able to count on that, that is the loss, and grief can follow. I also feel like there is sometimes and I've been guilty of this, of minimizing the loss of a treasured object. So there are places that matter a lot to us. And when we lose the connection to them or we lose them altogether, that can really cause some heartache. It may not be on the same level as some of these other experiences that we're talking about, but we don't want to minimize it. We don't want to dismiss it because those things are difficult and that it is part of life. And certainly losing a home, maybe it's because it's too large, it's too difficult to maintain, it's too expensive, or even just because there's a job change or there's an opportunity or you want to be closer to family elsewhere. To leave a house that you call a home, can be a really big change and be a really difficult change. So when we talk about grief responses, I'm not just talking about our emotions. I'm talking about a lot more. So this is a more holistic view of what that grief response may be. And I want to caveat this that I'm going to give several examples of each different kind of response because everyone will respond differently. And even you responding to one loss versus another may experience your grief differently. And that's okay. That's normal. We expect that. So these are all of the aspects of a grief response that may come up. The emotions are definitely part of it. We often hear about people talking about a roller coaster, feeling like maybe their emotions are changing from one moment to the next. They may feel okay in one moment, and the next moment they may feel really angry. They may feel really sad. They may be laughing the next minute. The ups and the downs can be really difficult, but are absolutely normal. We also want to highlight the physical aspect of grief responses because with all those emotions happening in the same body, there's going to be an impact on our physical selves as well. So much of our emotions are part of our brain, and that can impact the way that the rest of our body feels. So we never want to overlook the physical aspects of grief, especially because it could be combining with another physical health issue. A lot of the people that we support are caregivers. They were caregivers for their person. And in that caregiving experience, they've set their own needs aside in order to put that patient first. And without their regular checkups, without the bandwidth or the time to go to their own appointments, we then take that time in our grief to try to shift that focus back and get back into those things to make sure that if there are physical symptoms of grief, that we're making sure there's not something larger underlying all of that, because they can certainly compile. The cognitive experiences of grief can also be very physical. The experience that I often hear people say is that they just don't feel like themselves anymore. And they're worried about what that means, why they're changing. And a lot of it is just the way that the brain responds to grief. It's very similar to a trauma or a stress response. And so it's trying to prioritize everything that's coming in at your brain is trying to prioritize everything that's coming in at it. And it's saying, okay, well, these really higher level thinking issues, I'm going to set aside because we got to just focus all of our power right now on getting up in the morning, on taking care of ourselves, on getting sleep and moving our body and navigating these emotions. It's overwhelming. But what often happens is people are trying to navigate funeral or memorial arrangements, And those are really, really tricky, higher level thinking skills. So it can be really overwhelming. And your emotions certainly don't help to navigate that any easier. So there's a lot happening in the brain, and that's why people might feel like they just can't retain new information. They're struggling with finding the right words. And some folks, especially if dementia was part of that patient's death, then they may be concerned about what this means for their own cognitive health. Again, we want a medical provider looking into any of that to make sure there's not something larger going on. But generally, the onset is so quickly after the loss that it's pretty clear that this is grief. There's a big social impact with grief as well. Social support is one of the best indicators to us of how this person is going to be able to integrate their grief moving forward. So when we know that folks have reached out to their informal supports, their friends, their family, the people that have always been there for them before, but they've been met with difficult messages about dismissing their grief, minimizing their grief, judging the way that they're going about their grief, putting demands or expectations on the way that they should be acting or what they should or shouldn't be doing yet. Those can be really difficult, and it can cause people to self-isolate because the support, the acceptance, the affirmations aren't there. So we know that social support is really, really important. And we also know that it can be really, really difficult. And that's part of why our mission is to create a more grief aware community, because the idea is that if we're aware that this is normal, this is how we all respond to grief, then we can do better to support one another, right? Instead of passing on those misconceptions. Finally, there's a spiritual element of grief as well. And this can take shape as far as faith and religion, as many people will feel that they're in a crisis of faith, that what they had believed before doesn't match with their lived experience now, or they may feel very affirmed in their faith. They may find comfort in their faith. But I also mean this in a broader sense of spirituality, and the idea that the way we relate to the world has now changed. I thought the world was a safe place, but then my person died, and now it doesn't feel as safe anymore. Or the world felt like a safe place, and I had a lot of friends, but now I've moved and I don't have the same connection to people, and I don't feel as confident. So that shift in kind of having our world turned upside down, that is a spiritual response to grief as well, and it can be very disorienting. So I want to take you all into an exercise just quickly to connect to your own experiences of loss. And you don't have to go deep. I'm just going to pose some questions to help you consider and reflect where you're coming from. Because a lot of us we've developed these ideas about grief and loss based off of our own experiences. So this is going to help us moving forward and just in considering what some of those myths or misconceptions are. So as you sit with me here, consider when did you first experience death? Was it close to you? Was it more of a general conversation? How old were you at that point? And how did you respond or react? What were your thoughts? Do you remember the first service that you attended, whether it was a funeral or a memorial or something else, some ritual? Were you participating or were you just observing? Again, thinking about how old you were and what sort of messages you might be taking away from that experience. What are some of the vivid memories? And then thinking about how you've coped with loss throughout your life. Maybe what's been most difficult. Consider why that might be. And hold on to those thoughts and those insights as we talk about some of these myths and misconceptions and relate it to maybe where you're at now and any losses that you might be feeling these days. So the myths and misconceptions, there's one of the biggest ones is that grief comes in stages. And we hear people relate to this in various ways by saying, well, I haven't been through denial yet. So, you know, I guess that's coming down the line. Or I can't get through the anger stage. I'm just stuck in this anger stage. Maybe people are really connecting to various models of grief. But the truth is that there's so many ways that people experience grief. And those phase or stage models that were once put out about grief and loss are just general ideas. And there's a lot that, and also, I mean, that was almost 60 years ago. And so there's been a lot more research, a lot of discovery that there's many more ways to experience grief. And so if that stage model just isn't really connecting with you, that's okay. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. That's sometimes how it feels when people, say, I haven't been through the denial stage yet. That doesn't mean you have to go through the denial stage. That was just one person's idea of how someone might experience grief. There's also a misconception that there is a right way to grieve, that there are things that you should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and that that's just the path through for everyone. It's all the same. So again, we'll hear little clues that people believe this misconception when they ask, is it okay that I'm still visiting the cemetery? Well, I should probably take down all those pictures. You hear the judgment that's kind of behind all of this? There's this misconception that's believed that they should or shouldn't be doing these things, that there's a time to stop visiting the cemetery. You're going to think I've lost it, but I find myself talking to them every day. It's actually very normal. If I could tell you the number of people that have told me that specific one, they would understand that they're normal. They would understand they're not the only one. But that's often what it feels like, is that I'm doing this thing and it feels like it's helping me, but I'm getting messages from other people, or I'm getting looks from other people, or I'm getting the sense that maybe this isn't correct. The truth is that there's no right way and there's no wrong way to grieve. On our team, we sometimes talk about how we wish that there was a right way, because then we could just educate everyone about that one right way, and we would have the secrets to unlock, healing. But the truth is that we're human and we're messy, and we all have our own personal, beautiful characteristics that can kind of navigate this in our own way. And so that's also beautiful, right? The fact that there's not one secret to unlock all of that, it's that you get to actually decide for yourself. And so maybe that can feel freeing. Maybe there's some freedom in that, especially at a time when it can feel like you don't have a lot of control. One of the big myths also is that grief follows some sort of timeline. Again, there's not one specific way that you need to go through this, and there's no secret timeline of when you should be doing this or that, when you should no longer do this or that. Some of the things we hear are that it's time to get rid of X, Y, or Z. Other people around you may say, well, shouldn't you be over that by now? People really say these things. Well, when are you going to get back out there? You have so much of your life left. You have to start dating again. Well, at least you could try again to get pregnant. There's all these experiences after a loss, and these messages that we can understand, maybe well-intentioned, the idea that they want you to live your life. They want you to engage in life in a meaningful, enjoyable way again. But it really, to me, it also speaks about how uncomfortable we can be with the things that are hard and with the pain. So there is not a timeline for grief. And Kubler-Ross even says herself that the idea of getting over a loved one is not reality. Instead, we learn how to live with it. We integrate that experience into our life as we move forward. She says, you will be whole again, but you'll never be the same, nor would you want to be the same, which I think is a lovely inclusion, because if we wanted to be the same, that means that we're just ignoring all of the influence and impact that that person had in our life, right? And we've lost that. So we can't really be the same. I'm going to review a few different types of grief and loss. And the reason for doing this, I don't want it to feel too academic. So my reason for doing this is just to highlight that there are all of these nuances of grief and loss that can really impact why one person may be feeling differently than another person. Certainly, it's going to matter with the relationship that you had with that person who died, with your own personality, your own loss history, the coping skills that you have, the support system that you have. All of those things matter, but also the way that that person died or the way that this loss occurred could have an impact as well. So I'm going to start with secondary loss. And there are many secondary losses that come alongside any individual experience of grief. So you can think about that raindrop hitting a pond as that primary loss. And we'll stick with a death-related loss. So if someone dies, that loss of that person is that primary loss. But all of the ripple effects after that, all the ways that life changes now that that person's not in your life, those are all the secondary losses. So they can be very concrete. It could be a matter of income. It could be a matter of connection to a support system. Maybe, we have parents that lose a child and they no longer have connection then to the school that that child attended or to the parents of that child's friends. So they've lost that connection to a support system. It could also be more abstract. It could be the way that you identify your own, am I still a spouse? The label actually changes to widower. Am I still a parent if I've lost my child? How many children do I have? All of those abstract things that change in the way that we view ourselves and the way that we move forward in life, the loss of hope, the loss of the future, the loss of those expectations, the loss of safety. A lot of our caregivers will talk about the loss of purpose, the loss of confidence, of the self-esteem that they got from doing a good job caring for that person. So there's a lot of secondary losses, and these are all just as legitimate to grieve as that primary loss. And I will tell you, in our counseling sessions and our groups, in our support groups, the secondary losses are as much of the conversation as the emotions around losing that person and that relationship and who that person was to them. Anticipatory grief is this sense that we are about to experience a loss. So, and this can start at different points when we're talking about chronic illness or end of life trajectory, that diagnosis or when the prognosis is given. Those may be points at which someone would start to feel anticipatory grief. In dementia, sometimes it's when you first start noticing the symptoms. You don't even have a diagnosis, but you start to anticipate how life might be different, what the end of life might look like, the challenges that lie ahead. It also sometimes happens just when someone starts dying, even just for the few days or a couple of weeks before that person dies. So anticipatory grief is something that sometimes people experience in those circumstances. Sometimes they don't. Any anticipatory grief isn't like a pre-grief where now you don't have to grieve after. It's just different. And it can be very grueling. It can, especially for prolonged declines. But it does offer us the opportunity to intervene and to have the conversations that need to be had, to say the things that we want to say while we still have the opportunities. Ambiguous loss is a different experience where perhaps someone is physically present, but psychologically or emotionally they are changed, or vice versa. So psychologically, they are gone, or I'm sorry, they still feel present. That emotional relationship with them still feels present, but they are physically gone. So for people who are physically absent but still feel very, very present in our hearts, that's often related to a deployment or to a miscarriage. Um, it could also be an estrangement, the idea that that person is still, they're physically absent from our lives, but they're still out there somewhere and we have this connection to them. And then physically present, the idea of dementia or substance abuse, even mental illness, where that relationship has changed because they psychologically feel so different. Cumulative grief is the experience of having many losses pile up in a short succession of time. So when this happens, we're not able to cope individually and really acknowledge the grief from each one. It kind of all starts to blend together and get messy. And it can result in exactly what this image is, just feeling very heavy and overwhelmed. What typically happens is that once someone is able to kind of look back, take a pause, and recognize all that they've been through, it's very difficult to honor the grief that's connected to each individual experience. And sometimes it can take more time to really integrate all of that grief moving forward because so much has changed. I wanted to include this concept of cultural grief as well, because I mean, for the last 15 years, but even more recently, we've been bombarded with a lot more stories about displaced people all over the world, either from conflict or natural disasters. And this idea of cultural bereavement has really grown and become more focused. Um, in acknowledging that when people are forced to leave the places that they call home, and move to completely, distant places on the globe, there's a lot that they've lost. And it's not just the familiarity, it's not just, the home that they lived in. It's about their language, it's about their culture. In a lot of these aspects, there's also this need or pressure to assimilate. And so a lot of what culturally was important previously might be lost because they're just trying to continue to survive. And in order to do that well, or even to thrive, they're kind of pressured into fitting the mold that they need to in this new society so that they can provide and get by. Um, we're also seeing that this can really impact not only whoever the migrant is, but also any children or future generations, because then they are left in the wake of not having the answers around their culture, their language. They may have that identity with that either country, nationality, or but not really truly feel it or understand it. So there's a lot that's still kind of emerging around this. There's a lot of focus in research right now about how that experience can actually impact the manner of their bereavement, um, even to the point of people not being able to engage in their cultural rituals. What they would think is traditional for a birth or for a death is maybe not even legal in the country that they've fled to. So there's a lot of interesting and heartbreaking findings that are coming out around cultural bereavement. So I just wanted to put that out there, because we were all witnessing it in these large conflicts and these large changes in our globe. So coming back down to our individual experiences, um, talking about coping and what that really looks like. I think that another misconception is that when you're coping well, It means that you aren't crying. It means that you are navigating your day to day without any issues. And truly, what coping well means is that there are those emotions that come up, there are those difficult times, but you have the tools in order to navigate that, where it doesn't have to completely take over the day, but you give it that moment to be expressed. You give it an avenue to be acknowledged. So I just want to start there. And that's often, a fine balance of one moment to the next. So coping can actually seem really messy sometimes. But extending ourselves that self compassion, again, saying this is a reasonable response, this is a normal response to the significant life change or the significant loss that I'm coping with. When we talk about coping, a lot of this is based off of well-being. The idea that we need to first take care of ourselves so that we can navigate these difficult moments. It goes back to some of those grief responses I was talking about. The idea that it's typical for your brain and it's a biological change for your brain to be navigating all of this at once. So if we can at least focus on some really foundational well-being aspects of our days where we're eating good food, we're connecting with people socially, just talking to someone on a daily basis. It doesn't mean you're going out to lunch every day, but that you have that connection to someone, you're not isolated, that you're getting some sleep, that you're trying to move your body in a way that feels good. Those are all aspects of well being that can be really difficult when you're grieving and can often be overlooked. So, this is a model that helps helps to kind of frame some of those things. They call it the AND self care plan. It's the idea of attending to, of nourishing, and distract. So we'll talk through each one of these. So attending, the idea that you're going to attend to your grief. You're going to face your grief. So talking to someone who's going to listen to you without chiming in, without sharing their own story. That might be a way that you can attend to your grief. Maybe you write down how you're feeling, or you write down your experiences, or you draw, or you paint, or maybe you take photos of things that help you connect with your grief. There's a lot of creative ways that you can do this. If talking isn't your speed, or if you don't want to journal, there are all these different ways that you can kind of attend. I know a lot of people will also read books about grief because that is their way of connecting to maybe a memoir of someone else who has been through a similar loss, or more practically, just reading a book about grief to try to understand it a little bit more and put it into their own lived experience. So there's a lot of ways you can attend to. And the idea is, how is it going to be most helpful to you? What feels natural to you, or at least as natural as it can? Nourishing sounds, or it is exactly as it sounds. It's getting back to that idea of well-being. So maybe you establish some sort of routine to support some better sleep quality. Maybe you're focusing on your nutrition and you just want to make sure that you're getting all the nutrients that you need each day, that you're eating 3 meals, that you're drinking water. Any one of those pieces could be hard depending on who you are. So wanting to think about those goals or those ideas and writing them down so that they're easy to reference moving forward. You may not have the energy to do this at another time. So putting that time in now can be really helpful moving forward. Distracting. This can sometimes be surprising to people, but it is okay to be distracted from your grief, to kind of quote unquote take a break from your grief. The idea being that you can't attend to your grief all the time, right? You need to be able to nourish yourself and nurture yourself and be able to re-engage in some of the things that are happening in your life moving forward instead of spending all the energy in looking backward. But you also don't want to only distract yourself, right? So the idea is that you're balancing these 3 things, and as you see, there is overlap here. Um, But the distraction pieces can be a really important part of taking care of yourself, of making sure that you have fuel in your tank so that you can do the things that are harder. So a lot of different distraction ideas here. Depends on really what might be enjoyable for you. Maybe you don't even know. Maybe you don't even know what is going to make you feel comfortable, what is going to just give you a shred of joy. um, that's okay. Just trying some things out, maybe revisiting things that have helped you in the past or that you used to enjoy. Um, Trying things with a friend might be easier. Someone who has that experience. There's also a lot of strategies in the moment when maybe what we would call as like an activating experience happens, where all of a sudden we're just flooded with the memories, all of a sudden we're flooded with the feelings of our grief, and it took us by surprise. I feel like this tends to happen most for people in the grocery store, and it makes sense because we run into people at the grocery store that we don't expect to, and it reminds us of, our loss, or maybe they ask about it, or maybe they don't even know and we have to tell them. Maybe there's some music on that makes us think of our person. Maybe we're walking past that flavor of oatmeal that they loved. All of those things that kind of compile into this one experience of grocery shopping, which you have to do to take care of yourself. It becomes a really difficult experience. But these are some strategies where it can help you in the moment, no matter where it is. It can help you in the moment to either allow that experience to happen and be okay with it, to know that that's all right, um, or to get back to it. Because there are times where it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel appropriate to go there. So how do you get back into it? So mindfulness is a huge aspect of this, where you really just want to be aware of what's happening, paying attention without that judgment, just acknowledging where you're at right now. And maybe you set an intention, but maybe you're just paying attention to how you're feeling, what's going on in your body. You can use meditation. I think visualization or imagery can be a really accessible way for folks to get into mindfulness, to get into meditation. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you can sometimes just close your eyes, pay attention to your breath, and visualize your favorite place in the world. And just pay attention to all of the senses happening in that moment. That can be a really accessible way. No matter where you are, that's a tool that you have. The body scan can also be really helpful. The idea that you either start from your feet or from your head and you just scan through your body and pay attention slowly to each part of your body, releasing any tension that you feel. That can be really helpful too, just as a reset. Grounding is another version of this, but it's the idea of getting out of your mind and just getting into your body that can help to ground you instead of being off somewhere in your mind, which may be full of memories, it may be full of pain, but to get back into your body instead kind of zooms you back into the present moment. And you can use what's around you to help you ground and to help you feel safe and secure and remind you that you are okay in this moment. So those breathing exercises can help, where you're paying attention to the inhale and the exhale, activating the five senses that you have just in that moment. Name three things that are blue around you. Um, just take a deep breath. What do you smell, if anything? What can you hear around you? Are your feet planted? Those are all aspects that help to physically ground you. I have an example from a client who usually has just like little treats of chocolate, and that can help to ground because you can just focus on the taste in your mouth and the sensations in your mouth, and no one has to know. That's just something that you do for yourself. A change of scenery can also be really helpful. Just removing yourself from a situation taking a break. That can be really helpful, just to change your mind and use your surrounding again to help you out and get back into the present moment. Gratitude is also a huge part of grief. And that may sound surprising, because when you are grieving, it can sometimes feel impossible to find anything to be grateful for. But the truth is that there's always something. There's always something. And these simple acts of appreciation can really build these pathways in your brain, where it becomes easier and you become more resilient as you are able to find the things to be grateful for. And that can have a really significant impact on your mood and on the way that you even conceptualize your grief. So things like mindfulness and journaling can really help with that. But even something as simple as flipping through your photo gallery, or a scrapbook or your photo albums, um, talking with people about your person, hearing their stories, just reminiscence can really help with finding some gratitude. And a lot of people find ways to give back in their grief too. Um, for various reasons, they may find it to be helpful, whether it's in honor of the person who has died, or it's a way for them to continue to feel purposeful. I'm just going to briefly mention rituals so that we can get to some resources. Um, Rituals are really meaningful in grief. They help people to acknowledge the personal aspects of their relationship with a loved one and reconnect to those things. We use rituals at Hospice and Palliative Care Buffalo, with our memorial walk. We have these ribbons given out to all of our walk participants, and they signify varying relationships that people had with the person who died. And they come to the walk and they tie those ribbons to this metal wreath. And that's a representation of our community's grief, of the shared grief. You're not alone. And it's really meaningful. So, really, the more personal these things are, the better. And it's certainly something you can do on your own. It's something that we do publicly with things like memorial services and funerals. But it gives you an opportunity to really honor your grief and the loss of that person. Okay, so how to help others. This is one of the biggest questions I get. How do I know what to say and how do I know what not to say? My answer to this is usually you don't have to say anything. A lot of what people need in their grief is simply acknowledgement. They don't need you to share your story. They don't, not always. Sometimes that can be a point of connection, but let them speak first, you know? And certainly don't lead with, I know exactly what you're going through. We want to make sure that people have that space to share, and we don't want to try to take away their pain. We might think that that is how we can make them feel better, but actually there's no making this better. There's no fixing this grief. So just letting someone actually feel their feelings is the most important thing we can do. Now, if you're feeling like you need to say something, there are some there's some guidance here. And I can make this handout available to you somehow. Maybe Katie can help me with that. But I just pulled a few of their examples because I think these are some really tricky areas where we find ourselves saying, let me know if there's anything I can do. Actually, it's more helpful if we offer up exactly how we want to help them or suggest a way that we could help them instead of kind of giving them the homework of telling us when and if they need something. There's also a lot of people that are just more action oriented. They maybe can't sit and listen, but they're really good about getting things moving. So maybe some of these more practical pieces of support could be helpful. Really harnessing your relationship and what your strengths are is going to be the best path forward. So just highlighting some resources as we close out for some questions. I wanted to identify just some reputable sources other than ourselves. Alliance of Hope, the Compassionate Friends. The Dougie Center is a great resource. We pull a lot from them, especially for children and teens. Megan Devine and What's Your Grief. Those last two are really great at maintaining contemporary issues on grief and loss and sharing updates around that. But the truth is that if you really don't have to do any of that yourself. We are here to help you with that. We can do a lot of the picking for you. We kind of filter our entire database through the experience that you share with us so that we can say, you know what, I think these are the things that are going to be really helpful to you. And or I we don't have this resource created. Let me see if I can find it somewhere, or give me some time to put it together for you. So the best course of action is always to reach out to us. Let us know how, where you're at and how we might be able to help. We can certainly give you some ideas in just hearing your story of how we we might suggest moving forward as well.
Awesome, Anna. Thank you so much for that presentation.
Of course.
Always a joy hearing you give that information. And I'm seeing a couple things here in the chat. So if anybody's thinking about stuff, just type it in there. Seeing the cultural bereavement piece is very thought provoking. I agree
Mhm.
with that. Wow. And then I'm seeing I really needed to hear these things today.
Good. I'm glad you're here.
And I'm hearing I can't, or I'm seeing, excuse me, I'm seeing I can't stand when people say I know exactly how you feel.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. And again, we come from this space of good intentions, right? Of wanting to connect, of not wanting that person to feel alone. But the truth is that no one knows exactly how I'm feeling, how you're feeling. We each, even if it's we both lost our moms, they're different circumstances, they're different relationships, and we, as much as we can connect over the commonalities, it's also important to show the nuance too. Like we want to be seen, we want those aspects to be acknowledged.
Absolutely. And I know people can shut down if somebody says that. Like, oh, you know exactly how I feel, so I don't need to say, or you don't know anything about me, so I don't feel comfortable saying how I feel.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, we'll just give it another second here to see if anything else comes through. And while we're waiting, is there anything else you'd like to share with us or for us to know about today?
um just on the topic of, I guess, grief and grief awareness, um August 30th is Grief Awareness Day. And so that's something that we will have some like digital media, social media information out about. But something to even just consider for yourself. And maybe that's, if there's any struggling to have these conversations with people around you, maybe that can be an angle. Um, it's also Father's Day this weekend, which can sometimes be difficult with experiences of grief and loss, even years later. So I'm just going to encourage you all to take extra good care and make sure that you do what you need to do that day, and that there's someone that you can reach out to. Certainly, if you need to talk with anyone from our team before then, you have a few days, and we find that it can be helpful just to kind of prepare a little bit for the day, just so that when those expectations surprise you, you're a little bit more prepared.
I really appreciate that. And the theme here is you're not alone. There are people and services that can provide support for if and when you're ready. Oh,
Yes,
well,
Katie.
now I'm just seeing a couple thank yous. So, Anna, thank you for all you do. Thank you for spending this time with us. And to everyone who's on, thank you for being here. And please share the information you've learned with everybody else so we can all heal together and do what we need to do.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right, bye.
Bye.